The war had been going on for 37 years. 37 long years of blood and fire across 1,000 worlds. The hegemony of free worlds, a coalition of 12 alien species, had been fighting the Vreth Dominion since before most of its current soldiers were born. The Vreth were cruel and endless, pouring out of the dark spaces between stars like a plague that could not be stopped. And now, for the first time in history, humans had been invited to observe. The coalition warship was called the Burning Horizon. It was massive, nearly 2 kilometers long, bristling with weapons and carrying soldiers from half a dozen different species. The ship hummed with constant activity as it moved through the void toward the front lines. Daniel Ortiz sat alone at a corner table in the mess hall. Everyone called him Danny, though nobody on this ship knew him well enough to use that name yet. He was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that looked like it had been carved from old leather by hard years. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, and they had seen things that most beings in this galaxy could not imagine. He was the oldest human in the small expeditionary group that had been sent to observe the Coalition's war. He was also one of the oldest soldiers on the entire ship, which was strange to the aliens around him. The Kethvari, insect-like beings with hard shells and compound eyes, rarely served in the military past 20 cycles. Their bodies simply wore out too fast. The Oruan, tall and thin creatures with pale blue skin and large dark eyes, considered 30 cycles to be ancient for a warrior. Most of them retired long before that. Their reflexes too slow for combat. But Danny had served for 40 years. 40 years in the United States Marine Corps, through wars that these aliens had never heard of, on a planet they had only recently discovered existed. He sat with his sleeves rolled up, nursing a cup of something that the ship's food systems insisted was coffee. It was not coffee. It tasted like someone had burned plastic and mixed it with water, but it was warm, and it gave his hands something to do. His arms were bare, and that was what drew the stares. Every inch of skin from his wrists to his shoulders was covered in tattoos. Names, dates, symbols, and images wrapped around his muscles like a second skin. The ink was old in some places, faded by sun and time. In other places, it was darker, newer. The tattoos continued beneath his shirt, covering his chest and back, climbing up his neck. Everywhere that clothing could hide, there was ink. Across the mess hall, a group of young Kethvari soldiers kept looking at him. Their compound eyes caught the light as they turned their heads, and Danny could hear them chittering to each other in their own language. The translator implant behind his ear picked up fragments of their conversation. So much marking. What does it mean? Humans are strange. Danny ignored them. He had been stared at before. He would be stared at again. It did not bother him anymore. Commander Yira Voss walked across the mess hall and sat down across from him. She was 34 years old, with dark skin and darker eyes. Her hair pulled back in a tight bun. She was the human liaison officer for the expeditionary group, career, military, smart, and ambitious. She had been trying to get Danny to talk since they had boarded the ship 3 days ago. "You're making them nervous," she said quietly, nodding toward the Kethvari. Danny took a sip of the not coffee. "Good," he said. "Nervous keeps you alive." Voss studied him for a moment. "You know, Sergeant Major, the whole point of this mission is to build relationships with our new allies. Being mysterious and intimidating might not be the best approach." "I'm not being mysterious," Danny said. "I'm being quiet. There's a difference. The Coalition commanders are curious about you. About all of us, really. But especially you. You're the oldest human they've ever seen in a military context. They don't understand how you're still serving." Danny set down his cup. "I'm not serving. I'm observing. I retired 11 years ago, and yet here you are. Here I am." Voss leaned forward. "Why did you agree to come? You could be back on Earth, enjoying your retirement. Instead, you're on an alien warship, heading into a war zone. What made you say yes?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. His eyes drifted to the viewport on the far wall, where stars streaked past in long lines of light. Out there, Somewhere ahead of them, soldiers were dying. They were always dying. Somewhere, that was the one constant in the universe that Danny had learned in his 40 years of service. Someone, somewhere, was always dying. Because someone asked, he finally said. And because I've never been able to say no when there's a fight that needs fighting. Voss seemed to want to say something else, but she was interrupted by a chime from the ship's communication system. A voice spoke in the common trade language that all coalition species used. All personnel, be advised. We have received a distress signal from Thessa 4. The colony is under Vreth assault. We are diverting to provide support. All combat personnel report to staging areas. The mess hall erupted into motion. Soldiers of half a dozen species rose from their tables and began moving toward the exits. The Kethvari clicked and chittered as they gathered their gear. The Orun moved with quiet grace, their long limbs carrying them quickly toward the doors. Danny remained seated. Voss stood up, her hand instinctively going to the sidearm on her hip. "This is it," she said. "Our first real look at how they fight." Danny finished his not coffee and set the cup down gently. "No," he said. "This is their first real look at how we fight." He stood up slowly, his joints protesting after years of hard use. His body was old, but it still remembered. It remembered the weight of a rifle in his hands. It remembered the sound of gunfire and the smell of smoke. It remembered how to move through a battlefield like water through cracks in stone. Voss watched him with an expression that was hard to read. "You're not cleared for combat, Sergeant Major. You're here as an observer." Danny looked at her with those storm cloud eyes. "Commander, I've been in more fights than you've had birthdays. If things go bad down there, I'm not going to stand around and watch people die because some piece of paper says I'm not cleared." He rolled down his sleeves, covering the tattoos that covered his arms. "Now, are you coming, or are you going to observe from up here?" He walked toward the door, and after a moment, Voss followed. Around them, the ship hummed with the sound of soldiers preparing for war. The burning horizon changed course, turning toward a distant world where people were dying. And Daniel Ortiz, 63 years old, retired, covered in the names of the dead, walked toward the sound of guns one more time, because that was what he had always done, and he did not know how to stop. The dropship shook like a dying animal as it fell through the sky. Plasma fire streaked past the viewports in lines of green and white, and the air inside the cramped compartment smelled like fear and hot metal. 20 soldiers sat in the deployment bay, strapped into their seats, waiting to either land or die. Danny sat near the back, his hands steady on the rifle they had given him. It was not a human weapon. It was a coalition standard-issue plasma carbine, lighter than what he was used to, with a trigger that felt strange under his finger. But a weapon was a weapon. He had learned that truth a long time ago. Point it at what you want to die. Pull the trigger, and hope you were faster than the thing trying to kill you. Next to him sat a young Kethvari soldier named Tikral. He was small for his species, with a dark green carapace and wings that folded tight against his back. His compound eyes were wide and bright, and his thorax vibrated with barely contained terror. He could not have been older than 8 cycles. In human terms, he was barely an adult, a child playing at war. Danny had seen 1,000 soldiers like him, young, scared, not yet broken by the things they would see. Some of them survived long enough to grow hard. Most of them did not. The dropship lurched sideways as something exploded nearby. Tikral made a sound that might have been a scream, his mandibles clicking together in panic. "First drop?" Danny asked, his voice calm. Tikral turned to look at him. "Yes. First real combat." Danny nodded. "Stay close to me. Do what I do. Don't think, just move." "How are you so calm?" Tikral asked. "We could die." Danny almost smiled. "Almost. We could die stepping out of bed in the morning. At least here, you get to shoot back." The dropship hit the ground hard. The impact threw everyone forward against their straps. And then the doors blew open with a bang that hurt Danny's ears. Bright light flooded in, along with the sound of gunfire and screaming. "Go, go, go!" someone shouted. Soldiers poured out of the dropship into chaos. The city of Thessa 4 was burning. Buildings that had once been homes were now ruins, their walls torn open by weapons fire. The sky was black with smoke, and the air was thick with ash and the smell of burning flesh. Vreth soldiers moved through the streets like shadows, their dark armor making them hard to see against the destruction. Danny moved on instinct. 40 years of training took over his body, pushing aside 11 years of retirement like they had never happened. He grabbed Tikral by the back of his carapace and hauled him behind a broken wall just as a plasma bolt sizzled through the space where the young soldier had been standing. "Stay low," Danny growled. "Move when I move. Stop when I stop. Understand?" Tikral's mandibles clicked in what might have been agreement. For the next 6 hours, Danny kept the young Kethvari alive. He kept the whole squad alive, reading the battlefield like a book he had memorized long ago. He saw patterns in the chaos that others missed. He knew when to advance and when to retreat, when to fire and when to hide. The Vreth were good. They were fast and brutal, their weapons tearing through coalition soldiers with terrible efficiency. But Danny had fought enemies like them before. Not Vreth, of course, but the same type. Aggressive, confident, used to winning. They did not expect resistance that could think, that could adapt, that could survive. Danny showed them what a human could do. He moved through the burning streets like a ghost, always where he was needed, always pulling soldiers out of danger. He shot a Vreth soldier who was about to execute a wounded Orruan medic. He carried a Kethvari with a broken leg to safety, while plasma fire burned the air around him. He organized a defensive line when the coalition forces started to scatter, his voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. By the time the extraction ships arrived, 11 coalition soldiers had survived what should have been a massacre. 11 soldiers who would have died without the old human who was only supposed to be watching. That night, back on the burning horizon, Danny sat alone in the observation deck. The stars outside were cold and distant, indifferent to the suffering that had happened on the world below. He stared at them with empty eyes, his mind far away. He did not hear Tikral approach until the young soldier was almost beside him. "May I sit?" Tikral asked, his translator turning his clicks and chirps into flat English. Danny nodded without looking. Tikral settled his insectoid body onto a bench nearby. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The ship hummed around them, carrying them away from the burning world, toward whatever came next. "You saved my life," Tikral finally said. "Many times today. I wanted to thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Danny said. "War isn't over. Plenty of chances left to die." Tikral was quiet for a moment, then his compound eyes fixed on Danny's arms, on the tattoos that covered every inch of visible skin. "I have been wondering something," the young soldier said. "My people mark our shells to show our victories. A great warrior will have many marks, showing all the enemies they have killed, all the battles they have won." He tilted his head, studying Danny's ink. "You have more marks than any warrior I have ever seen. You must have won many battles. You must have killed many enemies." Around them, other soldiers had started to gather. Orun, Kethvari, even a few of the massive reptilian Draxi. Word had spread about what the old human had done on the surface. Now they wanted to see him, to understand him. The mess hall had grown quiet. Everyone was watching. "Why so many tattoos, old human?" Tikral asked. His voice was innocent, curious. He did not understand what he was asking. "What do they mean?" Danny turned slowly to look at the young soldier. His storm cloud eyes were tired, so tired, carrying a weight that Tikral could not begin to imagine. "These aren't victories," Danny said. His voice was soft, but in the silence, everyone could hear him. Tikral's wings twitched in confusion. "Then what are they?" Danny rolled up his left sleeve, exposing his forearm. Names and dates covered the skin from wrist to elbow. Small text, cramped together, written in ink that had faded with years of sun and sweat and tears. "Their names," Danny said. "Names of people who died. Names of people I couldn't save." The mess hall was completely silent now. Even the ambient hum of the ship seemed to fade. Tikral stared at the names. There were so many. Too many to count at a glance. And this was just one arm. "I don't understand," the young soldier whispered. Danny looked at him with eyes that had seen too much death to ever truly be at peace again. "Let me tell you about them," he said. Danny pointed to a name near his wrist. The ink was old, faded almost to gray, but still readable if you looked close enough. "Marcus Webb," he said. "July 7th, 2004. That was the day he died." The soldiers around him leaned closer. Keth Vari, Orun, Draxi, even a few humans from the expeditionary group. They formed a half-circle around Danny, their faces lit by the soft glow of the observation deck's lights. "Marcus was 19 years old," Danny continued. His voice was steady, like he was reading from a report, but there was something underneath, something heavy. "We were in a city called Ramadi. It was in a country called Iraq. On Earth. There was a war there. There was always a war there. It seemed like." He paused, his finger still touching the faded name. "We were trying to get some civilians to safety. A family. Mother, father, 3 kids. The youngest was maybe 4 years old. Couldn't walk fast enough, so her father was carrying her." Danny's eyes grew distant. "A sniper started shooting at us from a building about 300 meters away. Good shooter, professional. Tikral's wings had gone completely still. He was barely breathing. The sniper had me in his sights. I didn't know it at the time, but Marcus did. He saw the glint of the scope, saw where the rifle was pointing." Danny's jaw tightened. "He stepped in front of me, took the bullet that had my name on it, died in my arms while that family ran to safety." The silence in the observation deck was absolute. Danny moved his finger to another name. "Patricia Santos. March 15th, 2009. She was a medic, 23 years old, with a daughter back home that she'd never met. The baby was born while Patricia was overseas. She was going to meet her when she got home." He took a slow breath. "We were in a place called Kandahar, Afghanistan. Another war. Another country. Same blood. We got ambushed. Vreth tactics, actually. They would have fit right in. Fast. Brutal. Trying to overwhelm us before we could react." His finger traced the letters of Patricia's name. "Someone threw a grenade. I don't know if it was one of theirs or one of ours that got knocked loose. Doesn't matter. It landed in the middle of 6 soldiers who were too wounded to move. Patricia was the closest one standing." Danny's voice dropped lower. "She didn't hesitate. Didn't think about it. Just threw herself on top of that grenade and wrapped her body around it. Took the whole blast." He swallowed. "Saved all 6 of them. They went home to their families. Patricia went home in a box. Her daughter grew up without ever hearing her mother's voice." An Orun soldier made a soft sound, something like a gasp or a sob. Their species felt emotions deeply, and this story was cutting into something raw. Danny kept going. He pointed to more names, one after another, his finger moving across his skin like he was reading a map of grief. Luis Mendez. Convoy ambush. He was driving. Could have jumped out. Saved himself. Stayed behind the wheel so the rest of us could escape the kill zone. Burned to death when the vehicle caught fire. Anthony Cooper. Helicopter crash. Gave his seat to a wounded soldier. Said he'd catch the next bird. There was no next bird. Nina Blackwood. She was a translator. Civilian, technically, but she went everywhere we went. She found out that an informant was feeding our positions to the enemy. Before she could tell anyone, they killed her. Cut her throat in an alley. She was 26. Danny pulled up his right sleeve. More names, more dates. The ink covered every inch of skin, dense and dark, a tapestry of loss. "These ones are from peacekeeping missions," he said. "Humanitarian work. We weren't even supposed to be fighting. We were there to help." He pointed to a cluster of names near his elbow. Aid convoy in Africa. We were bringing food and medicine to a refugee camp. Someone decided they wanted what we were carrying more than they wanted people to live. 12 soldiers died protecting trucks full of rice and bandages. His hand moved to his chest. He pulled his shirt collar aside, revealing more ink over his heart. The room seemed to hold its breath. Catherine Ortiz, Danny said, his voice finally cracking, just a little. My wife. She waited for me through 12 deployments. 12 times I left, and 12 times she was there when I came home. Didn't matter how long I was gone. Didn't matter how broken I came back. She was always there. His finger traced her name gently, like he was touching her face. She got sick while I was overseas. Cancer, the kind that moves fast. By the time they told me, it was already too late. I tried to get home. Pulled every string, called in every favor. Didn't matter. She died 16 hours before my plane landed. A single tear rolled down Danny's weathered cheek. He did not wipe it away. And here, he said, touching a smaller name below Catherine's. Sophia. Our daughter. She was the best thing I ever did in my whole life. Funny, and smart, and kind. Everything good about her mother, nothing bad about me. His voice broke completely for a moment. He had to stop, had to breathe, had to remember how to speak. She was 16. Driving home from a friend's house. Some drunk in a pickup truck ran a red light going 60 miles an hour. Killed her instantly. They said she didn't feel anything. Danny closed his eyes. I hope that's true. I hope she didn't have time to be scared. The observation deck was silent, except for the soft sounds of soldiers crying. Kethvari, Orun, Draxi, humans, all of them, weeping for people they had never met. For a man who had carried their names on his body for decades, Tikral's compound eyes were wet. His species did not cry the way humans did, but something was leaking from his eyes nonetheless. How many? He whispered. How many names do you carry? Danny opened his eyes. The tear had dried on his cheek, leaving a faint trail. 247. The number hung in the air like a weight. 40 years of service, Danny said. 247 people who died while I lived. Friends. Soldiers. Family. Strangers I couldn't save. He looked down at his hands, at the ink that covered them, at the names that he would carry until he joined them. Every one of them deserved to live more than me. Every one of them had something to go home to. But they're gone, and I'm still here. He looked up at Tikral, at all the soldiers watching him with broken hearts and wet eyes. I don't mark victories, he said. I mark debts. Every name on my body is a debt I owe. A promise I made that I would not forget them. That as long as I'm breathing, they're not really gone. The ship hummed around them, carrying them through the stars toward more battles, more death, more names. And Danny Ortiz, covered in the dead, sat in the center of it all, carrying his debts like armor. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The weight of Danny's words pressed down on everyone in the observation deck like a physical force. Finally, an elderly Orun commander named Sarath stepped forward. He was old for his species, his pale blue skin marked with ritual scars that ran across his face and down his arms. The Orun honored their fallen by cutting themselves, letting the scars heal as permanent reminders of those they had lost. Sarath had perhaps a dozen such marks. He looked at Danny with eyes that held a new kind of understanding. 247. Sarath said softly. In my entire life, I have lost 11 comrades. 11 soldiers who died while I served beside them. I carry their scars, and I have always thought that weight was heavy. He paused, his long fingers touching one of his own marks. But you carry more than 20 times that number. How do you bear it? Danny looked at the Orun commander. You don't, he said simply. You just keep walking. A Draxi soldier pushed through the crowd. The Draxi were massive, reptilian creatures with scales like armor and teeth like knives. This one was younger than most, barely full-grown, his scales still bright green instead of the darker color they would become with age. "I do not understand," the Draxi rumbled. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. "Among my people, we honor the fallen by forgetting them. We believe that to remember the dead is to chain them to this world, to prevent their spirits from moving on." "Why do you do the opposite?" Danny considered the question. It was a fair one. Every species had their own way of dealing with death. None of them were wrong. "Because I'm afraid," Danny said. The admission surprised everyone. The old human who had moved through a battlefield like a force of nature, who had saved 11 soldiers without flinching, who had killed Vreth with cold efficiency. He was afraid. "I'm afraid that if I forget them, it means they didn't matter," Danny continued. "I'm afraid that if I stop carrying their names, nobody will. And if nobody remembers you, then you really are gone. Forever." He stood up slowly, his joints protesting. The soldiers around him shifted back to give him space. "Humans live a long time," Danny said. "Longer than most of you, at least when it comes to military service. We don't wear out as fast. Our bodies can take punishment for decades before they give up. And because of that, we accumulate things." He walked to the viewport and stared out at the stars. "We accumulate memories. We accumulate scars. We accumulate names of people we've lost." He pressed his palm against the cold glass. "A Kethvari soldier might serve for 8, maybe 10 cycles before their body can't keep up anymore. In that time, how many friends can they lose? How many names can they carry?" Tikral thought about it. "Perhaps a dozen," he said quietly. "Perhaps less." Danny nodded. "I served for 40 years. 40 years of watching people die. Some of them were enemies. Most of them weren't. Some of them died in my arms. Some of them died on the other side of the world. And I only found out months later." He turned back to face the crowd. "Humans don't just remember our dead. We're haunted by them. They live in our heads, in our dreams, in the quiet moments when we're alone, and there's nothing to distract us from the past." Commander Voss had joined the crowd at some point. She stood near the back, her arms crossed, her face unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was soft. "The Sergeant Major received the Medal of Honor twice," she said. "For those of you who don't know, that's the highest military award a human can receive. It's given for acts of extraordinary bravery, usually at great personal risk." She paused. 40. She paused. "He's been awarded the Silver Star 3 times, the Bronze Star 6 times. He has more commendations than I have years of service." Danny shook his head. "Those don't matter. They matter to the people you saved," Voss said. "The people I saved don't need medals to remember me. And I don't need medals to remember the people I couldn't save." Sareth moved closer to Danny. The old Arun's eyes were wet with something that might have been tears. "You could have retired," Sareth said. "Your commander said you could have left after your first 10 years with full honors. Why did you keep serving? Why did you keep adding names to your body?" Danny was quiet for a long moment. "Because every time I thought about quitting, I'd look at these names," he said. "I'd remember that Marcus Webb never got the chance to quit. Patricia Santos never got to go home and hold her daughter. Luis Mendez never got to grow old and fat and complain about his knees." A sad smile crossed his face. "They didn't get to choose when their service ended. So how could I choose to end mine early? How could I walk away when they never could?" He looked around the room at all the soldiers watching him. Young and old, alien and human. All of them carrying their own weights, their own losses, their own names. "I kept serving because I owed it to them," Danny said. "Every mission I completed for them. Every life I saved in their name. Every day, I woke up and put on the uniform. I did it because they couldn't." His voice grew thick. "And now, even though I'm retired, even though I'm just supposed to be observing, I'm still doing it. Because that's all I know how to do. Keep moving. Keep fighting. Keep remembering." The Draxi soldier who had asked about forgetting stepped forward again. His scales had lost some of their brightness during Danny's words. He looked smaller, somehow. Younger. Among my people, he said slowly, we believe the dead are gone. But perhaps, he hesitated. Perhaps being remembered is another form of living. Perhaps your dead are not truly gone. Because they live in you. Danny looked at the young Draxi and nodded slowly. That's why I carry them, he said. As long as I'm alive, they're alive too. In here. He touched his chest, over his heart, where Catherine's name was inked into his skin. And in here, he touched his temple. And on here. He held up his arms, showing all the names, all the dates, all the debts he would carry until his own death. The dead don't want us to suffer, Danny said. But they don't want us to forget either. They want us to live. Really live. And to remember that every day we have is a gift that they didn't get. The ship hummed around them. Somewhere in the distance, another battle was being fought. More names were being earned. More debts were being created. But in that moment, in that observation deck, surrounded by soldiers from a dozen different worlds, Danny Ortiz stood as a testament to what it meant to be human, to carry the weight of the fallen, and to keep walking anyway. The battle for Thessa 4 lasted 3 more days. 3 days of fire, and blood, and screaming. 3 days of watching soldiers die on both sides of a war that had been going on longer than most of them had been alive. Danny served as an unofficial advisor to the coalition forces. The commanders had stopped pretending he was just an observer after what he had done on the first day. Now they asked for his opinion on tactics. They listened when he spoke about enemy movements and defensive positions. They followed his advice, and because of that, more of them survived than would have otherwise. On the 3rd day, the coalition pushed into the heart of the Vrith forces. The fighting was brutal, building to building, room to room. Danny moved through the destruction with Tikral at his side. The young Kethvari had not left his position since the first drop. He had learned more about war in 3 days than he had in all his training. He had learned more about courage from watching Danny than he had from any teacher. They were clearing a collapsed building when it happened. A Vreth soldier appeared from behind a pile of rubble. Danny saw the movement, saw the weapon rising, saw where it was pointing. Not at him, at a young Orun medic who was treating a wounded soldier 10 meters away. Danny raised his rifle, but he knew he was too slow. The Vreth had the shot. The medic was going to die, and then Tikral moved. The young Kethvari threw himself into the path of the plasma bolt. It hit him square in the thorax, burning through his carapace and into the soft flesh beneath. He collapsed without a sound. Danny killed the Vrith soldier. Then he killed 2 more who came running at the sound of gunfire. Then he was on his knees beside Tikral, his hands pressing against a wound that he knew was fatal. Green blood seeped through his fingers. Kethvari blood. The color of leaves in spring. The color of life, fading away. Old human, Tikral rasped. His compound eyes were dimming, their light fading like stars at dawn. I did what you taught me. I moved without thinking. Danny's jaw was tight. His eyes burned, but he did not look away. He would not look away. You did good, son. You saved her. The medic. She's alive because of you. Tikral's mandibles clicked weakly. It was the Kethvari equivalent of a smile. Will you? He coughed, green blood bubbling at his mouth. Will you carry my name too? Danny's voice cracked. Yeah, I will. Then I am not afraid. Tikral's eyes found Danny's face one last time. To be remembered is to never truly die. You taught me that. His body went still. Danny stayed there for a long moment, holding the young soldier who had saved a life by giving his own. Around him, the battle continued. Gunfire echoed through the ruins. Soldiers shouted and died and fought on. But Danny did not move. He sat with his dead friend and let the tears fall. That night, back on the burning horizon, Danny sat in the medical bay. A human corpsman named Ben worked carefully, adding a new name to the inside of Danny's forearm. The tattoo gun hummed softly. its needle biting into skin that had been bitten thousands of times before. Tikral, first coalition ally, first friend among the stars. When it was done, Danny looked at the fresh ink. The name was red and swollen, new and raw. It would heal. It would fade with time, but it would never disappear. 248. Word spread through the ship. By morning, a line had formed outside Danny's quarters. Coalition soldiers of a dozen species, all of them waiting, all of them wanting something, though many of them could not say exactly what. Sirath was at the front of the line, the old Orun commander who had watched Danny speak in the observation deck, who had listened to his story of loss and survival. "Will you teach us?" Sirath asked. His voice was quiet, almost afraid. How to carry the weight. How to remember without being crushed by it. Danny looked at the line of soldiers stretching down the corridor. Kethvari with their hard shells and compound eyes. Orun with their pale skin and ritual scars. Draxi with their scales and teeth. Even a few humans who had served in the expeditionary group, who had heard the stories and wanted to understand, all of them carrying their own names, their own dead, their own debts that they did not know how to pay. "Come in," Danny said. For the next several hours, he talked. He told stories about the people whose names he carried. He explained how he had learned to live with the weight, how he had found ways to honor the dead without being destroyed by grief. He spoke about memory as a gift, not a burden. About carrying the fallen forward into the future, instead of being dragged back into the past. He taught them the human way of remembering, and when he was done, when the soldiers finally left his quarters to return to their duties, Sarath lingered at the door. "You have given us something precious," the old Orun said. "A way to honor our dead that will last longer than scars, longer than ceremonies, longer than anything we have ever known." Danny shook his head. "I didn't give you anything. I just showed you what was already there. The love, the loss, the need to remember. Every species has it. You just need to find your own way to carry it." Sarath touched his own scars, then looked at Danny's tattoos. "Perhaps," he said, "but you showed us a path. And for that, we are grateful." He left, and Danny was alone. 3 months later, the human expeditionary group returned to Earth. Danny stood on the deck of the transport ship as it descended through the atmosphere, watching the blue and green world grow larger in the viewport. He carried 248 names now. 248 debts. 248 people who would never see this view again. But he also carried something else, something new. He carried the knowledge that out there, among the stars, soldiers of a dozen different species had started to mark themselves in the human way. Not with pride, not with glory, but with remembrance. On a Kethvari hive world, young soldiers were tattooing the names of fallen comrades onto their carapaces. On Orun homeworlds, warriors were adding ink to their ritual scars, writing the names of the dead alongside the marks of mourning. Even the Draxi, who believed in forgetting, had begun to question that tradition. Some of their young soldiers had started keeping journals of names, recording the fallen so that they would not be lost. The human way of remembering was spreading through the galaxy. And Danny Ortiz, 63 years old, retired sergeant major, covered in the names of the dead, had started something that would outlast him. He had taught the stars how to grieve. The transport ship landed, and Danny walked down the ramp onto Earth. The sun was warm on his face. The air smelled like grass, and rain, and home. He was tired. His body ached. His heart was heavy with names and memories and debts he would carry until his last breath. But he was still alive, still walking, still remembering. And somewhere out there, among the stars, Tikral's name would live forever. Because Danny would tell his story. He would tell all their stories. And as long as someone was listening, the dead would never truly be gone. That was the human way. And now, it was the galaxy's way too.